Imagine, just for a moment, that you are dealing with a severe life-altering diagnosis.
Right, something truly heavy.
Yeah, exactly. Like maybe it's terminal cancer,
Yeah.
or, it might be treatment-resistant depression that has just shadowed you for years.
Or even severe trauma or a substance use disorder that feels like this insurmountable wall.
Right. You have this constant heavyweight that just, well, it colors every single interaction you have every single day.
Hmm.
But now, imagine a single, deeply intense experience that completely changes your relationship with that illness.
Wow.
And I don't mean like a magic pill that makes the physical disease suddenly vanish. I mean a profound internal shift that radically alters how you actually live with it.
It is a really remarkable concept. I mean, it challenges so much of how we traditionally approach chronic or severe conditions in standard medical care.
Because standard care is mostly about symptoms.
Right. The focus is almost entirely on symptom management, like
Mm.
how do we shrink the tumor or, how do we stop the physical cravings?
Yeah.
But what we were exploring today, it bypasses the physical symptoms to address the intense psychological suffering that, well, always travels alongside those conditions.
And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We are looking at this fascinating 2023 qualitative metasynthesis from the International Journal of Mental Health Nursing.
It's a great paper.
It really is. They analyzed what happens when you give clinical doses of psilocybin to 96 different people facing vastly different health battles.
I mean, the range of conditions is staggering.
Oh, totally. We are talking about individuals dealing with terminal cancer, profound depression, HIV, trauma, and severe addiction.
Yeah.
And what the researchers found across 10 different studies is absolutely wild. Whether you were trying to quit smoking or facing the end of your own life, the human brain undergoes the exact same core psychological breakthrough.
It's incredible.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are going to explore the 3 universal themes that emerged across all these wildly different human experiences, which are acceptance, connection, and transformation.
It is genuinely fascinating to see such universal themes emerge from, such diverse human suffering.
Yeah.
But before we can really understand the lived experiences of these 96 people, we kind of have to look at the catalyst.
Right, the psilocybin itself.
Exactly. We need to understand what psilocybin actually is, and more importantly, what it is physically doing to the architecture of the brain.
So, I mean, I know psilocybin is the naturally occurring compound found in certain species of, magic mushrooms. But how did we get from ancient indigenous use to the FDA slapping a breakthrough therapy label on it in 2018? I mean, that is a massive paradigm shift.
Right.
What is the actual timeline here?
Well, it has been an absolute roller coaster, frankly.
I bet.
Yeah, indigenous peoples in Mexico used psilocybin in religious and healing ceremonies for at least 3,000 years. It was deeply integrated into their culture.
Wow, 3,000 years.
Right. And then in the 16th century, the Spanish arrived and completely prohibited its use. So it was driven underground. It actually wasn't until 1957 that scientists managed to formally isolate the compound.
So there was this brief window where Western science actually got to look at this stuff.
Yes, and during that brief window, there was intense scientific exploration, mostly in group settings.
Okay.
And the researchers were yielding incredibly positive reports about life-changing insights from the participants.
But then the 70s happened.
Exactly. The political climate shifted dramatically. The 1970 Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act in the U.S. and then a 1971 UN convention, they essentially criminalized it globally.
Wow.
Yeah, research just went completely dark for nearly 50 years.
Half a century of silence. Up until 2018, when the FDA designates it as a breakthrough therapy specifically for treatment-resistant depression.
Right.
So what is the science that finally broke through that 50-year freeze? Like, what is actually happening in the brain to warrant a breakthrough label from such a strict regulatory body?
Well, it really comes down to a very specific mechanism. Psilocybin interacts with the brain's serotonergic system. Specifically, it targets a receptor called 5-HT2A. But to understand why this matters, you have to look at what happens to a brain suffering from severe depression or addiction.
What does happen?
Over time, patterns of brain activity become incredibly rigid. The brain essentially gets stuck in a deep, restricted rut.
Like it's just spinning its tire.
Exactly. Certain networks become overactive and entirely inflexible.
I want to pause on that real quick because when you say certain networks, the research specifically calls out the default mode network or the DMN.
Yes, the DMN.
What exactly is that doing when we are stuck in a rut?
So think of the default mode network as the brain's background noise.
Okay.
It is the network that just sort of hums along when you aren't focused on a specific external task.
Hmm.
Crucially, it is the autobiographical center of your brain,
Meaning what, exactly?
meaning it is the part of you that constantly ruminates on the past, worries about the future, and constructs your whole sense of self.
Oh, wow. So if your constructed sense of self, like your me, is constantly defined by being sick or being traumatized or being an addict, the default mode network just hardwires that painful identity on a constant obsessive loop.
Precisely. You become completely trapped in a self-referential loop of suffering.
That sounds exhausting.
It is.
Yeah.
So what psilocybin does, chemically, is cause a temporary disintegration of these intrinsic rigid brain networks. It basically takes the default mode network offline.
Just shuts it down.
Temporarily, yes.
Yeah.
And at the exact same time, imaging studies show it massively increases global brain network integration.
Wait, meaning what?
Suddenly, completely different parts of the brain that do not normally talk to each other start communicating freely.
Oh, I see. It sounds essentially like taking a snow globe that has settled into these rigid, frozen patterns, like all the snow is just packed down tightly at the bottom, totally immovable.
I love that analogy.
Right. And the psilocybin just gives it a massive shake. So for a brief period, the snow is swirling everywhere, allowing the brain to form new, more flexible connections before the snow eventually settles again.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. You are shaking the snow globe. And while that snow is swirling, while the brain is in this highly flexible, hyper-connected state, the patient experiences profound dose-related alterations in perception, emotion, and thought.
Which it inevitably brings up the concept of hallucinations.
Yes, it does.
And if you are listening to this, you might immediately associate the word hallucination with something terrifying, like a psychotic break. But the researchers draw a very hard line between the two, though, don't they?
They do, and we absolutely must clarify that difference because it is fundamental to why this works as a therapy.
Right.
Psychosis is typically dominated by auditory hallucinations. People hear voices that they believe are entirely real.
Like indistinguishable from reality.
Exactly. Psilocybin, on the other hand, primarily induces visual hallucinations. Patients report seeing, brightly colored geometric shapes, spirals, cobwebs, or even incredibly complex scenes and landscapes containing entities or spirits.
Sounds intense.
It is, but the critical defining difference is insight.
Insight, meaning they know they have taken a therapeutic dose of a compound, like they aren't lost in the delusion.
Exactly. In a clinical psilocybin session, the patient's insight remains completely intact.
Wow.
If you hear voices in a psychotic break, your brain truly believes those voices are real external threats. With psilocybin, if a patient sees a terrifying geometric landscape, a part of their brain is sitting back going, well, look at what my subconscious is producing right now.
So they're observing it.
Right. They are aware that what they're experiencing is the effect of the treatment. They can observe their own fear or their own trauma without being completely consumed by it.
So because the brain's rigid networks are temporarily dismantled, because the snow globe is shaken and the patient can safely observe their own mind, they are suddenly capable of viewing their illness through a radically different lens.
Yes.
And that psychological flexibility is what allows our 96 participants to arrive at the first major theme the researchers found across all the studies, which is acceptance.
Yes, acceptance. And in the context of this research, it represents a profound internal shift.
How so?
It is the transition from being anxious, fearful, resentful, or overwhelmed by a condition to a peaceful acknowledgement that it is simply part of who they are. It is the cessation of the internal war.
The cessation of the internal war. That is, the quotes from the participants in this study are staggering when you really let them sink in.
They really are.
There was a cancer patient from one of the studies who had this revelation. They realized that cancer, quote, isn't this bad separate thing. It's something that's part of everything. It was just a sort of acceptance of the human experience.
Consider how that fundamentally changes the narrative of their remaining life,
Yeah, entirely.
Instead of the illness being an alien invader that defines their entire existence as a daily, exhausting battle, it becomes integrated into the broader tapestry of life.
Right.
The cancer is no longer a monster in the dark. It is just a thread in the fabric.
Then there is the participant dealing with severe trauma and PTSD. They described how, after the treatment, they could literally look at their PTSD on the floor around them.
Just right there on the floor.
Yeah. They said they could choose to scoop up all those piles of trauma, put it in a folder, and decide whether to carry it around with them or not.
Notice the incredible shift in agency in that description.
Yeah, they have the power now.
For someone with severe PTSD, trauma is usually a controlling, overwhelming force that dictates their reactions, their relationships, and their daily function.
They are completely at its mercy.
Exactly. But during this therapy, the trauma became an object. It became something they could observe, categorize, and most importantly, choose how to interact with.
Another participant, this one living with HIV, discovered during their session that both beauty and darkness exist in their mind. And their conclusion was simply, and that's okay, they both exist, it's just part of me.
It's beautiful.
It is. But I have to play devil's advocate for a second, though.
Sure. Because if you look at how society talks about illness, it sounds almost counterintuitive. We are taught from day one to fight diseases. You battle cancer. You conquer addiction.
Right, the warrior mentality.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So does this kind of profound acceptance mean they are just giving up? Like, are they surrendering to the disease?
What's fascinating here is it is a common misconception, but the data points to the exact opposite. Acceptance does not equate to resignation.
Okay.
The research overwhelmingly shows that acceptance actually creates the motivation to change.
Wait, how does accepting a terrible diagnosis make you want to change your life?
Because you stop wasting all your psychological energy denying the reality of your situation.
Oh, I see.
Think about the study focused on substance use disorder.
Yeah.
A participant with severe alcohol dependence hallucinated during their session.
What did they see?
They didn't see a warm light at the end of a tunnel or some blissful escape. They saw literal chains, heavy iron chains binding them.
Oh my God, that sounds terrifying. It is, but it was also the breakthrough.
Yeah.
They recognized in that moment that they were in bondage to alcohol.
So they finally saw the truth.
Exactly. That wasn't them giving up. Seeing the chains was the first true, unfiltered acceptance of the reality of their illness. You cannot break chains if you spend all your energy refusing to acknowledge you are wearing them.
Wow.
The acceptance of the bondage provided the profound motivation they needed to finally start the hard, grueling work of recovery.
That makes so much sense. If you are listening to this and you've ever tried to break a bad habit, even a minor one, you know that denial is the thickest wall you have to break through. You have to clearly see the obstacle before you can navigate around it. So once that exhaustion of constantly fighting the illness stops, once they put down their armor and stop denying the chains through acceptance, what happens to all that mental energy?
It has to go somewhere.
Right. It doesn't just disappear. Nature abhors a vacuum. And according to the data, what rushes in to fill that space is our second universal theme, which is connection.
Connection, yes. In these studies, it is described as a lasting shift from feelings of separateness and isolation to a deep, resonant interconnectedness with the wider universe, with nature, and with other people.
The researchers bring up a concept that we rarely talk about in physical medicine, framing severe depression as an illness of isolation or a disease of disconnection.
It is a vital observation. Almost all severe illnesses carry a secondary, invisible symptom of profound isolation.
Why is that?
Well, when you are suffering, whether from physical pain, depression, or addiction, you inherently feel cut off from habitual interactions. Your world shrinks.
Yeah, you just sort of pull back.
Right, you feel entirely misunderstood by those around you who are healthy. You become fixed in a singular, incredibly lonely perspective.
And the psilocybin experience seems to shatter that isolation. Let's look at the smoking cessation study, which feels so different from terminal cancer, but yields the exact same result.
It really does.
A participant realized that everything in the world is connected, and they said that if they continued to smoke, they would be a polluter.
A polluter, yeah.
Yeah, they realized they would be causing tangible harm to other people's health because, quote, everything is interwoven. Reevaluating their place in the universe actually helped reduce their physical cravings for nicotine because they realized their actions were not happening in a vacuum. The addiction relies on a self-centered perspective, just feeding the immediate craving. The psilocybin shifted them into a state where they felt a tangible personal responsibility to the interconnected web of life. The desire to honor that connection overrode the chemical craving.
And then on the completely other end of the medical spectrum, you have a terminal cancer patient who described the profound relief of feeling connected to animals, trees, and people.
Which is so beautiful.
It is. They said it helped them accept death because they realized they wouldn't just go off into nothingness.
Right.
Why? Because, quote, you're just not alone.
It is absolutely wild to me that you have incredibly diverse triggers, someone wanting to put down a pack of cigarettes versus someone facing the imminent end of their life, yet the exact same feeling of cosmic interconnectedness is the mechanism providing relief for both.
It highlights a massive glaring gap in how we currently administer clinical care. Standard medical models treat the physical symptoms. We have nicotine patches for the smoker, we have chemotherapy and radiation for the tumor.
Right.
But psilocybin is targeting the profound emptiness or the deep melancholy that accompanies the human experience of illness.
The stuff that usually gets ignored.
Exactly. If you read through the participant quotes, they repeatedly mention that the emptiness inside them is ultimately not empty at all, but filled. The therapy replaces the isolating walls of the disease with a tangible, felt sense of belonging.
So if we trace the logic here, when you combine a profound acceptance of your current state, dropping the denial, with a deep cosmic connection to the world around you, it inevitably catalyzes the third and final theme found in the research: transformation.
Transformation is the ultimate synthesis of the first two themes. Participants across the studies described experiencing a newfound freedom from their past, a powerful reclaiming of presence in their daily lives, and a massive expansion of their emotional repertoire.
One depression patient used an analogy that feels so visceral. They said it felt like a reset switch had been pressed so everything could run properly. They said it unlocks certain parts which were restricted before.
Which maps perfectly back to our understanding of the default mode network.
Oh, right.
The rigid brain networks were literally restricting their thoughts and emotions, keeping them locked in a cycle of despair. The therapeutic reset switch allowed those networks to communicate freely again.
It's like having a house where all the doors between the rooms have been deadbolted for years. You just pace the exact same narrow hallway over and over because it's the only path you have access to.
That's a great way to put it.
Suddenly, all the doors swing open at once. You have access to the whole house again. But we have to address a very real nuance here, because reading this, it can sound like a purely blissful, easy, magic bullet.
It is not.
Right. The researchers noted that in both of the cancer studies, participants sometimes experienced what they call transient psychological distress.
Yes, and it is a crucial point. The initial stages of the psilocybin experience can involve feeling completely overwhelmed or experiencing a terrifying loss of control.
Which makes sense.
Right. If you have spent years tightly controlling your environment and your emotions just to survive a chronic illness, having all those doors in your mind swing open at once can be deeply unsettling. Shaking the snow globe can be frightening when you are used to the snow being packed down safely at the bottom.
Which is exactly why the researchers stress that this is a clinical therapy, not recreational drug use. The concept of set and setting is paramount.
Absolutely paramount.
The text explicitly points out that this transient distress, the scary moments, was always alleviated by the reassurance of a trained therapist in the room. They aren't doing this alone at a party. They're in a highly controlled, safe setting, being actively guided through the scary, hidden parts of their own subconscious.
And that professional guidance is absolutely critical when they encounter what psychologists call ego dissolution.
Ego dissolution. It seems very mystical, very Eastern philosophy, but there is a real measurable psychological and neurological mechanism happening there. Let's break that down.
Absolutely. The ego, in psychological terms, is our constructed sense of self. It is the story we constantly tell ourselves about who we are, largely maintained by that default mode network we discussed earlier.
The background noise.
Right. When the DMN disintegrates under the influence of psilocybin, that ego, that story, literally dissolves.
Wow.
If your ego has been built entirely around the narrative of, I am a sick person, I am an isolated person, or I am broken, dissolving that core identity is terrifying. It feels like a kind of death.
Because that identity, as painful as it is all you know. It is your survival mechanism.
Precisely. But that dissolution is also the necessary prerequisite for transformation.
You have to clear out the old.
Yes. By dissolving that rigid, painful identity, patients are able to rewrite their self-identity from the ground up. They transition from the limiting belief of I am my illness to the expansive belief of I am a connected, whole person who simply happens to have this condition.
That is massive.
That shift in identity is the true transformation.
They realize they are the sky and the illness is just the weather passing through.
Beautifully said.
So, to bring this all home, what does this mean for you, the listener? Why does a 2023 metasynthesis on clinical psilocybin matter if you never encounter a psychedelic therapy session in your entire life?
Well, it matters because of what it reveals about the human mind. The researchers make a beautiful point in the conclusion about the core tenets of mental health nursing and the broader recovery movement in psychology.
Okay, what do they say?
The entire foundation of healing, whether from physical trauma or psychological pain, is based on exactly these things, fostering self-acceptance and building deep connection.
You do not need a synthesized compound from a mushroom to start practicing these principles in your life today. Nurses, caregivers, friends, and everyday people can integrate these exact strategies to help loved ones come to terms with illness.
Absolutely.
We can actively work to destigmatize vulnerability. We can help people build meaningful connections with nature, with their communities, and with themselves, entirely without drugs.
That's the real takeaway here.
The psilocybin in these studies merely acted as a chemical spotlight, eliminating exactly what the human mind requires to heal its own suffering.
It proves that the capacity for profound acceptance, deep connection, and lasting transformation already exists entirely within our brain's natural architecture.
The hardware is already there.
Yes, the therapy just temporarily removes the roadblocks so the patient can access what was always there.
If the hardware is intact, we just need to help each other find the key. So we will leave you with this final thought to mull over today. If a chemical compound found in nature can reliably induce profound acceptance, cosmic connection, and life-altering transformation simply by temporarily dissolving the rigid networks of our brain, what does that tell us about the walls we build between ourselves and the rest of the world every single day? Think about the grudges you hold, your feelings of isolation, or your daily anxieties. Are they grounded in reality, or are they just an illusion created by a brain that is temporarily stuck in a rut? Keep shaking the snow globe.